Now, in my introductory, or I could say slightly more pretentiously, programmatic video on physicalism, I've talked about two basic approaches to philosophy, namely synchronic and diachronic. So synchronic meaning talking about the ways in which our picture of the world hangs together right now, logically speaking, from physics to psychology and international relations, and on the other hand, diachronic or historical inroad into philosophy, starting with the first philosophers in the West, albeit because we are mostly dealing with the Western traditions in the kinds of courses that I teach. Now, even though I have been talking about physicalism, in some general, more important sense, I think to me these are the two high roads to philosophy. These are the two primary approaches that I think a thinking person could take that would lead them to study philosophy seriously. Now, I actually think that there may be a third approach. So let's pause here and retrace our steps. We're asking, how does our worldview hang together? One way to start is to look at the history of the worldview. The other one is to examine the logical connections within the worldview itself. A third place, I think in some sense, would be to just close your eyes and to ask yourself, like, what am I doing here? And I imagine there are different ways a person could do that, but what I have in mind, broadly speaking, is the phenomenological approach. In my mind, associated first and foremost with the great German philosopher Martin Heidegger. And so what I wanted to do is to post a recording of, again, somewhat brief, somewhat unpolished, fairly basic presentation of Heidegger's philosophy, which I have recorded several months ago. And so, with all the usual disclaimers in mind, here goes. Again, very famously, Immanuel Kant said that the three most important questions of philosophy are: what should I do? What can I know? What can I hope for? But as he says, these three questions can be reduced to a more fundamental question of what is a human being. And I mean, this way of phrasing it for Kant, philosophy is a human enterprise first and foremost, which deals with human questions relevant to human beings and human concerns. If you want a practical discipline, this thing I kept talking about with respect to ancient philosophers, this idea of philosophy being to the soul what medicine is to the body. So in this sense, I think that Kant, when he phrases these questions, and Heidegger continue this tradition. I don't know, we can do this just for fun. I do this in my philosophy classes. This is René Descartes. I mean, should we think of Heidegger as anti-Descartes? I don't know. Anyway, so I mean, actually, I cannot really find a good place to start. So let me start with a quote. I don't know. This is the way I usually start my classes on Heidegger in philosophy of science course, just to set the mood. This is a very short quote. This is a quote from William Golding. You've probably heard the name from his book Darkness Visible, which is a really fascinating book. It is at the same time the most interesting and the most boring book I've read. At the same time, like in a superposition. But it's a wonderful book. I mean, Golding has won a Nobel Prize in literature, not nothing. Okay, so it's talking about a girl, young girl of about 15 years old, and her grandmother dies, and this leads to certain thoughts appearing in her head. It's a short quote, so the quote goes like this. So it was at this very point that Sophie, the name of the girl, that Sophie made her discovery. The mystery of things and her grandmother dying drove Sophie in on every side into herself. She understood something about the world. The world extended out of her head in every direction but one. And that one was secure because it was her own. It was the direction through the back of the head, there, which was dark like the night, but her own dark. She knew that she stood or lay at the extreme end of this dark direction, as if she was sitting at the mouth of a tunnel and looking out into the world, whether it was dusk or dark or daylight. When she understood that the tunnel was there at the back of her head, she felt a strange kind of shiver that shot through her body and made her want to escape from it into daylight and be like everybody else. But there was no daylight. She imagined the daylight then and there, filled it with people who had no tunnel at the back of their heads, gay, cheerful, ignorant people, and then she fell asleep. That's the quote. I think it's a very Heideggerian quote. The image that I was sort of, first time I read this book about 10 years ago, or 15 years ago, I guess, the image that stuck in my mind is this image of the dark tunnel at the back of the head. Dark tunnel, well, anyway, let me just write dark tunnel at the back of the head. And in some sense, maybe this is the sort of the fundamental, most important starting point for me to start talking about Heidegger. So, in principle, before we talk about Heidegger, we should talk about Descartes. Descartes in 5 seconds. So Descartes has this very famous meditations. So he was an officer in an army. He was actually sitting inside of a stove, like a big fireplace, sort of a special compartment to keep people warm in extremely freezing temperatures. So he was there inside of a stove in a very cramped space in complete darkness. And again, as an aristocratic officer with nothing to do, he just lay there and thought about what he was. And he had this transcendental, I don't know, metaphysical experience of feeling like himself as this bodiless spirit. And this experience prompted Descartes, again, this is the invention or the birth of new European subjectivity. And by the way, with you guys, we talk about Hobbes, and Hobbes' individualism. So this is one of the roots, I suppose, of Hobbes' individualism. Hobbes obviously knew Descartes, and actually read Descartes. Actually, I think he proposed some criticisms of Descartes' meditation of first philosophy, but whatever. Anyway, so for Descartes, classically, I mean, Descartes is actually more sophisticated than this, but an oversimplified version of Descartes is that we discover that we are mental objects in the world of physical, we are mental subjects in the world of physical objects, and mental or thinking beings, or immortal souls which are attached to these bodies. And we know ourselves directly, we can perceive our soul, and we are free in a straightforward sense. I can choose to do whatever I want, at least within the limits of possibility. And this was the beginning, the formulation of European philosophy for a very long time. And I mean, this issue of subjects and objects became problematic as time went on, for many reasons. One of them being that, if you think of it this way, if you are an immaterial soul trapped in a material body, how does the interaction work? If these two things belong to two separate worlds, as Descartes, a dualistic philosopher, thought, how is it supposed to work? So, for example, if I drink wine, I get drunk. So a physical interaction affects my mind. Or let's say, I want to raise my arm and my arm goes out. So it seems that there is no separation, there is no Chinese wall. But for Descartes, there is this Chinese wall between me and the world outside, but also between me and other people. In the sense that, let's say, my soul is directly visible to me, but your soul is not visible to me. So, in fact, for Descartes, I'm not sure if you are even alive or conscious. So for Descartes, he has this Chinese wall in two senses, between me and the material world and me and the world of other people. So other people, and both of these are problematic because you see, it doesn't seem that this is a workable picture. Because with dualism, there's always a problem. If me and other people, or me and the material world, if we belong to the separate world, how do they interact? Well, you could say, okay, let's just say that they're part of the same world. But this goes against many of the very deep-rooted assumptions of the Western philosophy. Because in the Western philosophy, especially starting with Christian philosophy, people like Augustine, it was very important that human beings need to have this ontological freedom to do whatever. To oversimplify, my take on this is because the biggest driving force behind this was theological reasons. God will send some people to hell for all eternity for finite sins. So there's going to be an infinite punishment for finite sins you do here. So in order to bridge this gap, Christians need to be able to say that yes, your sins are finite, but you had complete freedom to perform them or not to perform them in the full knowledge that sinning will result in eternal damnation, and so you have freely chosen to sin, even knowing that this will make you eternally damned. You've made your choice, so it's fair. God is not a jerk, I don't know. God is, this is called theodicy, right? The justification of God. And actually Hannah Arendt, some of you might have heard her name, has a very interesting article that we may want to read at some point. This is a fascinating article. It's called What is Freedom? And Hannah Arendt actually traces the ideas of Western conceptions of freedom and talks about the freedom of the soul and political freedom, and especially how Christian freedom of the soul came to replace political freedom of the ancients, which Arendt thinks is a bad thing because she's like this proponent of active political life, right? And so the name of the article is "What is Freedom?" And she basically, in some sense, she tries to say how the Stoic tradition, and especially Augustine, basically have killed the tradition of ancient republicanism, and this is a great disaster. And this is why we have totalitarian. I mean, to oversimplify, this is why we have totalitarianism, because we have forgotten that the most important freedom is the freedom, outward freedom to act in the world, and not this inward freedom to, let's say, resist tyranny inside of your own consciousness. Which is this passive, useless resistance, which does not help us fight National Socialism, which is Arendt's concern. I'm oversimplifying grossly, but it's something like that. Anyway, okay, this is way too long because immediately I'm talking for 10 minutes, not getting to Heidegger. But this is the background. This is the background. Again, so you see, this is problematic. Separating myself from the world and separating myself from other people is problematic because even though our post-Christian culture requires us to postulate this autonomous, sovereign space of free will, it doesn't seem that the world actually works this way. But if we think about this deeply, it seems that, and let's say if we think about this deeply, and we have to say there's only one material world, and my mind is just a thing. My mind is just a certain process which is produced by my material body. And at the same time, if we say that I am not separate from other people and I'm just a continuation of my culture, this seems to rid us completely of autonomy, but also of responsibility. And this a lot of people find deeply troubling. I mean, in general, we talked about this a little bit, I think, in the Introduction to Social Political Philosophy course. But of course, you don't have to postulate freedom of the will in order to, send people to prison. For example, Hobbes, Hume, and Mill do not believe in free will, but all of them would say, yeah, it's fine to punish criminals because this is deterrence. It's a whole separate story about free will. Yeah, if you want, let's talk about free will at some point in a later class. Oh, sorry, class, meeting. I think fundamentally maybe this is the issue. Like I feel that the battle that Heidegger is doing is primarily like the reason why Heidegger has to battle against this age-old tradition is because of this. Well, he himself would probably say that his biggest target is Plato and the metaphysics of presence. Is this related? Well, maybe to some extent. But okay, let me just signal this and move on. Let me give you the conclusion, and then we'll start. So the conclusion in Heidegger is this. So this is going to be not a quote. This is in my own words. So point number one is that human beings are not these autonomous Cartesian subjects, but human beings are anxious and mostly unconscious products of larger forces. Now, when I say products of larger forces, this doesn't sound very Heideggerian. Heidegger would talk about being, or maybe he would talk about society. Well, his word would probably be being, but sort of acting, what's the right phrase? Going against the grain of Heideggerian terminology. Let me use this phrase: products of larger forces. And later Heideggerians, like Marcuse, who would try to connect Heidegger with Marx, for example, they would say products of larger forces of what I would call biological and cultural evolution. So let me write this on the board with a question mark. This is not what Heidegger is talking about, but this is why I think Heidegger is important for us today. Cultural evolution. Heidegger doesn't know about this, but he's not interested in this. But his philosophy is uniquely apt to explain these things, and these are not his concerns, but these are, I think, our concerns, or should be our concerns. So again, human beings are anxious, mostly unconscious, products of larger forces of biological and cultural evolution, manufactured by those forces, not to be happy, but actually to fulfill a certain function in the perpetuation of the logic of these systems of cultural, biological and cultural evolution. But I mean, Heidegger would stop here. We're anxious, unconscious, and products of something larger than ourselves. This is my interpretation. And the second thing that I would talk about is that we're anxious, or also, in addition to this, we're driven. Like, you wake up in the morning, our existence is an issue for us. We care about our existence always already, necessarily, and we cannot choose not to care about our existence. As Hobbes says, life can never be without motion, without sense, and without desire. If motion would stop, life would stop too. And Heidegger agrees with Hobbes in some fundamental respect. Yeah. So human beings are driven always. We're always driven. I mean, he doesn't use the word desire, but anyway, we are driven towards some goals. But I think that again, in putting not in Heidegger's terms, but in my own terms, I would say that we want things that we do not really need. So our drives lead us to think that we want things that we do not need, and the things that we really need, actually, we cannot get. These are the conclusions, not particularly optimistic conclusions, but that's a start. This is the point I'm aiming at. Okay, so by my watch, I have 10 minutes left. Let's see if I can do this in 10 minutes. How does Heidegger proceed? So again, if you ask yourself, what is your fundamental experience of the world? Descartes says your fundamental experience of the world is of this active, rational, immaterial subject, thinking subject in the world of physical objects. This is what Descartes says. And Heidegger would agree in the sense that, yes, for some people, some of the time, this is the experience that they bring into focus. But actually, if you think about this deeply and clearly, this is not what we are. If you ask yourself, like you do some kind of a genealogical approach, you ask yourself, like I ask myself, how did I end up here, standing here in front of you? How did it happen? And you go back in time. And time is important, for Heidegger, crucially important. In some sense, being is time. This is why the book is called Sein und Zeit, right? Being and time. Past, present, and future, we'll talk about this in a second. But if I go back in time, I get to a certain point. Well, again, the phrase that, again, not Heidegger, but Brian McGee uses in explaining Heidegger says, we always already find ourselves emerging from the unconsciousness of some previous moment in our life history. So, I suppose, oops, I keep doing this. I don't know. So, always already is an important phrase in Heidegger. So my German pronunciation is terrible, but it's something immer schon in German. So we always already find ourselves emerging from the unconsciousness of some past moment. And we emerge from this unconsciousness with certain dispositions, with a baggage, if you want. We find ourselves with dispositions such as beliefs, desires, values, and a whole bunch of other stuff. We find ourselves in a body, in a particular world, etc. Beliefs, desires, values. This is you remember I love talking about it in this way. This is Plato, the rational, the spirited, and the intelligent part of the soul, which I think is a good way of phrasing the basic disposition of our psyche. These would be probably the three most important ones. I'm not sure if Heidegger talks about it in this way, but this is superficial, oversimplified Heidegger. So and. Like, technically speaking, I would say that if I think about this unconsciousness of the past moment, there are two unconsciousnesses that I can think of. One is the unconsciousness of early morning, awaking from a deep sleep. Sort of like, in some sense, you can think of this phenomenologically. Again, phenomenology is an important word for Heidegger, meaning looking at our experience in the way that it presents itself to us. So phenomenologically, in the way that it presents itself to me, the experience is as if I was born this morning. Yes, I have these beliefs, desires, and values, especially memories of the past, but memories of the past don't exist in the past, they exist today. It's like, well, I mean, more to be said about this, but let me stop here. But then, if you try to push backwards through this unconsciousness of the early morning, we always already find ourselves emerging from the unconsciousness of early babyhood. We don't remember being born. We are already, yes, important word in Heidegger, we are thrown into this world, and we find ourselves thrown into this world. And also, very importantly, thrown without a manual. Some people will try to sell you some kind of a manual. Say, this book or this movie or whatever, or this person has it all figured out. But you see, the manuals, so to speak, that our culture offers if I may put it this way, come without a factory warranty. People claim that they know what life is about, but again, there is no stamp of manufacturing stamp. You don't know. You have to try it for yourself, and you can never be sure if it's successful or not. By the way, yeah, in some sense, I am tempted to begin every class in philosophy by talking about this. In fact, I began the first lecture with you in Introduction to Social Political Philosophy. This is the first thing I said. In some sense, I think this is maybe why I think philosophy is the most important thing that, it's very arrogant, and take it with a grain of salt. Of course, I'm a professional philosopher. Yeah, of course, a professional philosopher, I think philosophy is the most important thing that people do in life. But yeah, we find ourselves without a factory manual, and it means that we have to decide how to act. And deciding to not decide is also kind of a decision. If you don't think for yourself, other people think for you. So if you don't take your existence seriously, as Socrates says, you might as well be dead. You're not living your life. People may disagree, but this is I suppose, a fundamental moment at which philosophy begins, at least for me, and which is why I'm tempted to talk about this in every class, and which is why I think social political philosophy, moral philosophy, political philosophy, both are such important subjects. Again, let me digress for 5 seconds. Socrates, again, the beginning of Western philosophy, what does he do? He walks around the streets of Athens and he accosts innocent pedestrians and asks them to give an account of their life. Like, you, dear sir, what are you doing? Why are you here? Why have you chosen to be here? And people try to give certain answers, right? And this is not exactly the way Socrates proceeds, but let's imagine this. Ask me, why the heck am I here? And I would say, well, this is training for a lecture I'm going to record for Coursera in the summer. But why do you want to record on Coursera? Well, this is going to look good on my CV, this is going to be career advancement, maybe I'll get a new course, maybe I'll get a raise, something like that. Yeah, but why do you want to advance your career? Well, maybe I'll get prestige or I'll get paid more money. Okay, but why do you want bronze statues erected in my honor, right? But why do you want bronze statues erected in your honor? Or why do you want more money or something like that? And you see where this is going. At some point, I will run out of answers. And at some point, like if you ask them, like, why do you want to be happy? Or why do you want to be esteemed by other people? The answer is, technically speaking, I do not have the slightest idea. I don't know. I find myself with a certain kind of disposition which I have not chosen, but I cannot give account of this disposition. Descartes is all about choice, or your economics, rational choice theory, is all about choice. People choose. But Heidegger wants to draw our attention to the fact that, yes, we choose many times, we choose a large number of things in our lives, but we always choose on the basis of things that we do not choose. On the basis of dispositions, beliefs, desires, life situation, whatever, of the things with which we find ourselves. Again, I don't choose to like to be happy. I don't choose to like reading Heidegger. I don't choose to like hanging out with you guys. It happens to my body. So in some deep and important sense, if you ask me, why am I here? My honest reply would be, I do not know. In fact, how much conscious control actually is there? And Heidegger is all about this. I mean, if I was not afraid of boring you to death, we could talk about this for many hours. Heidegger is all about this, things that we do completely unconsciously. So, transparent coping. Heidegger has these categories, Zuhand and Vorhand. I suppose transparent coping would be Zuhand, right? So things that you just see through, like when you walk through a door and you turn the doorknob without actually thinking about this. So in some sense, yeah, I'm here without actually thinking about this. Did I, like Descartes would tell me, did I actually rationally decide in the morning that I would, wake up and go here? Or is it that in some sense, like my body takes over? Yeah, I have to do this. We have an arrangement. We have a meeting. Never, honestly, well, I mean, I was preparing for a talk on Heidegger, so I suppose maybe some thoughts like this crossed my mind, but honestly, I'm not sure. I'm not entirely sure that any such thoughts crossed my mind. Like, did I at any point this morning ask myself, like, do I really want to go here? I mean, some of you, I mean, in general, this was much less of an obligation on your part. So many of you might have asked yourself this question in a different fashion. But for me, it's just something I do. And if this class is not a very good example, think about the regular lectures I give. This is never a question. And much more so. When Andrei Sergeyevich tells me, Alex, it's a new course, we don't have a teacher, do you want to teach it? It's not really a question in my mind. It's like, again, in some sense, there's a certain way that my life is structured, and it's as if think about this. This is an interesting way of looking at this. I observe from inside of my own head how my lips move, and I say, yes, Andrei Sergeyevich, I would be happy to do that. Or actually, right now, I mean, I'm giving this talk, but honestly, it's I think I first taught a class on Heidegger about 5, maybe 6 years ago. This is like a 7th or maybe 10th time I'm giving this talk on Heidegger. Many of the phrases I give are like just repetitions. I've mostly learned by heart. So in some sense, you're listening to me talk, I'm listening to myself talk. This is not really this Cartesian conscious experience where I choose what to do. No, it's preset to a very large extent. Yeah. So most of our lives we live like this, but then you can try to stop. And mostly this is like most people don't do this. Usually something external needs to happen to you. And then you stop, and then you begin philosophizing, which is, I suppose, why most people don't do philosophy. Because you need to have this experience, maybe a traumatic experience, but not necessarily. And I would say it's difficult. I was looking for a good word in English. It's like stoppage, halting, break, pause, остановка. Did we come up with a good expression? I'm not sure. So, okay, I'm still looking for an expression. So usually you just go through your life, you go through the motions in an almost unconscious fashion. But then, for very few people, you have this experience. Well, I mean, John Searle, American philosopher from Berkeley, calls this the experience of the gap between the intention and the action, where suddenly you stop. Maybe like in Jean-Paul Sartre, this experience of nothingness, like this choice open to you, and you do not know what to choose and how to choose. Let me write halting. For the lack of a better word. The normal course or maybe suspension. The normal course of affairs is suspended. Now, spoiler alert, let me immediately jump to conclusion. Heidegger doesn't have a solution to this. He says, yes, you halt, you stop, but what can you do? One way or another, you just go back to your normal routine. Yes, there's going to be a difference between authentic and inauthentic Dasein. I love giving lectures on Heidegger without mentioning the word Dasein once. Why? Why not, right? So anyway, there's a difference between authentic and inauthentic experience for Heidegger, but I think that ultimately at the end of the day, Heidegger has no right to be judgmental. If some people are inauthentic, what can you do? I mean, we find ourselves thrown into this world, and we don't really choose to be inauthentic. It's something that happens to us. So let's say, in the past, I have a certain baggage of, again, finding myself with dispositions. So the past, in a certain sense, is what makes the world understandable to me. So I am able to read a particular book. So I'm able to read a particular notebook, let's say, because I know, I understand the words on the page, because I had certain experiences in the past. So let's say the structures of pre-understanding. I don't know, this doesn't help. Structures of pre-understanding. Actually, Gadamer, Heidegger also uses this phrase, prejudice, prejudgments. Something I inherit from the past, automatic judgments. Like, let's say, you see a piece of rotting meat, and you, without thinking about it, without consciously in the Cartesian fashion deciding, you automatically feel disgusted. Or at least the vast majority of anatomically normal human beings feel disgusted at the sight of rotting meat, let's say, festering with maggots. You don't choose to do this. Something you inherit, if you want, from the past. So in the future, you have the project. Now, Heidegger, in his anti-Cartesian fashion, wants to not have this mentalistic. He says, again, for Descartes, you think, you plan, you have this conscious, verbalized structure. Heidegger wants to say that consciousness, verbalized consciousness, comes at a later stage. I mean, you may hear a certain maybe echo of Nietzsche here when we talked about this master morality, slave morality, and the Uber. Well, let's not talk about the Uber, right? So, but the master morality is this consciousness without self-consciousness, right? So, in some sense, Heidegger wants to say that again, the unconsciousness of early babyhood is consciousness without self-consciousness. It's non-verbal consciousness. So, before you know how to speak, you already have this project in the sense of that you are looking forward. You are looking forward to the future. In a non-verbal, pre-linguistic, unconscious way. or unconscious, preconscious, whatever. Again, we also make conscious plans, but making conscious plans is just one part of this. And in some sense, Heidegger will say we don't choose to, and I suppose the important characteristic of this is that we care about the future. We care about what happens. We plan to use our time, and we cannot choose to not care. In the present, things show themselves to us. But this situation is clear to me, it's understandable to me, and maybe I should talk about hermeneutics in 1 second. Because hermeneutics is, Heidegger is associated with the hermeneutic movement, and hermeneutics just means the academic discipline which deals with understanding. How do we understand the world? It began with the question of how do we understand texts. Like one of the founders, maybe the most important founder of the hermeneutic subject was Schleiermacher, Friedrich Schleiermacher, who was a biblical exegete. So his question was, after the Protestant Reformation, after Luther, how do we interpret the Bible? What are the sources? Like, in some sense, how can you get to the true meaning of the Bible? And the short answer is that Schleiermacher, as a good Christian, found out that there is no procedure. You can never be sure that you are interpreting the Bible in the correct fashion. Anyway, what happens right now, it's clear to me, because I have the past and the future. If I didn't have the past, these things, you guys, my language, this cup, this pen, would not be understandable to me. I would not be able to see this pen if I didn't have a past experience, if you want. But if I didn't have a future, it would not matter to me. And in either case, without the past and the future, this experience would be impossible. I understand the pen because of something I inherit from the past, and the pen is meaningful to me because, in some sense, again, I'm planning to use it in the future, in some broad, pre-conscious way. Like these tables, even if I don't plan to sit at this particular table, in general, I understand what it's like to sit at a table, and this is a part of important part of what it's understanding about. And this is on the one hand. But on the other hand, Heidegger says, so this is our beginning of understanding what this whole thing is about. But if we think about this deeply, this becomes a very problematic phenomenon. Because ultimately, in the past, if you think about this hard enough, what you find, especially if you examine your prejudices, if you examine your beliefs, desires, and values, you will find that you cannot give a rational justification of any of them. So in the past, we find groundlessness. Again, if you ask any person question why enough times, the answer that they're going to have to give is, I don't know. Like again, why am I standing here? I don't know. Why am I teaching at high school? I do not know. Or why you are studying, right? So there's a certain fundamental groundlessness in the past. In the sense that, let's make this close to home. Like at any moment in time, I could just take off my clothes and start running and screaming. Why not? Can I give like a geometrical proof that I shouldn't be doing this? I'm not sure. Yeah, I have a certain system of assumptions, but I cannot justify these assumptions. Okay, but the world is clear to me because of the things I inherit from the past, but when I examine these things that I inherit from the past, I don't see a ground or justification for them. Likewise, when I look at the future, I have a certain plan to use things in the future. Plan, this is mentalistic. I have this certain unconscious, preconscious, pre-linguistic disposition to use things and time in the future. But actually, in the future, the most important experience, phenomenon is death. So again, this is Heidegger, the founder of existentialism. If you look at the past, you're groundless, and if you look at the future, you will be dead. So I said, this marker is clear to me because I have a past and a future, but if I think about this clearly, this marker is understandable, comprehensible to me because I have a past and a future. But if I think about this carefully, my past is groundless, and my future is death. And so, I understand the marker in a certain sense because of my prejudice, but actually, if I try to examine my prejudice, they're groundless, so maybe I don't understand the marker. This suspends the marker in the air, or this situation, or you. Likewise, if I think about the future, I talk about these CVs and Coursera's in the summer, but I'm going to be dead. And none of this is going to matter. Heidegger, to oversimplify, like Hobbes, is an atheist, And he doesn't believe in answer life. He doesn't talk about this. This would be like an inauthentic copying strategy for Heidegger to think about future life. A little bit like for Nietzsche maybe. Well, I mean Heidegger was a very careful reader of Nietzsche. So past and future enable my present experience. But if I examine my past and my future, my present experience goes up in the air, and I find myself in this suspended and very uncomfortable position. And so I suppose there are two ways to, two things I want to say with relation to this. So one is, I suppose, a certain conservatism that we get from Heidegger. Conservatism in several senses. So sense number one is that, you see, it doesn't matter who's going to win the next elections. Cool. And this is an insight that Foucault is taking from Heidegger. It's not that human beings decide rationally. It's not that I speak a language. In some important sense, the language speaks for me. In some important sense, culture acts through me. So in some important sense, it wasn't people of the United States of America who elected Donald Trump. No, it was the culture of the United States of America who elected Donald Trump. And in some sense, what's the right phrase? Like, there are cultures do change, and this is important for Heidegger. He has this question about history and how different historical epochs change. And in some sense, let's ask ourselves this question: Is it true about this groundlessness and death? Do you have to be depressed about this, or maybe is there a different approach? Is there a different coping strategy, or does every culture have this? It's a complicated question, and young Heidegger thinks yes, this is universal experience. I think that later Heidegger wants to say that, let's say, the experience of ancient Greeks, or let's say the experience of Japanese Buddhists, maybe is different. Okay, with a question mark. Greeks or the Japanese with a question mark, I'm not sure. Anyway, so but what I'm trying to say is that, see, political action, in some sense, becomes sort of meaningless on this picture. Like protests or elections or campaigning or that kind of thing. Like, societies could change, but they change through this slow and gradual evolutionary process. So in some sense, yeah, I suppose, again, very self-servingly, the most important people in our culture who are able to effect real change are great teachers, great philosophers, who propose new modes of thought, and these modes of, this is also a very Nietzschean thought, and this new modes of thought gradually propagate through society. I mean, obviously they change through time. It's not like you can create culture anew, but you can affect a certain change. Mm-hmm. And Heidegger would say that great writers or novelists or great philosophers or great religious leaders have much more impact than politicians in this respect. But why is this conservative? Because this isn't a question of French Revolution. Tomorrow we'll have a new dawn. This is, again, Hegelian conservatism or Burkean conservatism. Culture needs to evolve at its own pace. So again, as Weber puts it, Max Weber puts it, ein langsames Bohren der harten Bretter, I think. Yeah. The slow boring of hard boards. Politics is slow boring of hard boards. Медленное бурение жестких досок. So change doesn't come overnight. So let's write gradualism. The second conservative implication is there is no responsibility, there is no intentionality, there is no subjectivity. It is the culture that produces certain people, and they make certain choices on the basis of culture. People are not to blame. What you write here? No free will, no responsibility, no agency. Yeah, let's write no agency, or if there is human agency, there's very limited agency. No agency or no freedom. And again, this is very conservative. Maybe again in a very Burkean fashion, conservative. Burke very famously talks about the practice of widow burning in India, and he said, look, it's a different culture. This ritual may seem strange to you, but it's their culture, it's their way of life. Understand that rationality is limited. I mean, Burke is taking this from David Hume. He says that leave them be. It's their rituals. Do not be arrogant. Do not think that you, by your limited mind, can legislate, provide moral legislation for the whole world. Right? In a similar fashion, a Heideggerian would say, don't judge people in Nazi Germany. Don't judge people in ancient Egypt. Don't judge people in ancient Rome or whatever. Don't judge the witch hunts, or the inquisitors, or the Inquisition, or whatever. Because this is in some sense, this is the way the culture functions. This is the way society functions. And it's like what's the right phrase? It's like a natural phenomenon. Don't blame a tornado for destroying the forest. In the same sense, don't blame the Nazi Germany for killing the Jews, because it's the same, in a certain sense, the same level of natural phenomenon. Again, I'm not saying that Heidegger comes out and says this, but these are like the implications. Everything I say is a gross oversimplification in my own words and kind of tangentially related to Heidegger. I suppose the third thing, I'm not sure. Maybe the third thing I wanted to say, actually forgot what was the third thing. But Heidegger's own solution is poetry. So he says, this is something I sometimes like to talk about a lot, but today I sort of don't feel. But I don't feel that this is an important topic for today. If you want to talk about this another time, Heidegger is big about on our present culture. He says that what happens, basically, what our culture does is people have this subconscious or pre-conscious understanding that at bottom their life is groundless and they're going to die. And so, what they need is to not be groundless and not die. But this is what we cannot get. So what we need to not be groundless and to not die, we cannot get. So what we do is, in this quasi-Freudian fashion, we substitute. We say, instead of not dying, I want the next car, or I want to enroll into a prestigious university, or I want to marry or go out with this particular person, male or female, or both, whatever, right? So we substitute. And Heidegger wants to say that, phenomenologically speaking, and again, this is his hypothesis, this is his observation, assumption, that what happens to humans is that as soon as they achieve one goal, you get this new car, you marry this person, or you enroll into this university, or you get this teaching position, or whatever, or you get this job. What happens is it becomes old hat. You get used to it, and you move on to the next thing. Humans are perpetually driven. You're driven towards next and next and next, always next step. So, I think Lacan has this phrase, metonymic sliding of desire. I'm not sure I need to explain this. This is going to lead us astray. Metonymic sliding of desire, but the object of your desire is always beyond your reach, like a carrot hanging in front of a donkey, always ahead, always several steps ahead. And Heidegger wants to say that our technology, and again, Foucault, when he talks about government, again, Foucault is a very careful reader of Heidegger and Nietzsche, and as he says, like Foucault says that his two most important philosophers are, most important is Nietzsche, but he reads Nietzsche through a Heideggerian lens. Anyway, so Heidegger wants to say that, and this is a very important point of contact between Heidegger and Marx, this idea that our present culture is technological culture, so poetry is anti-technology. Technological culture, technological understanding of being. Actually, I think I don't have a single word of German on the board. Excellent. No, this is I can explain why this is important. Anyway, so poetry is so technological understanding of being is a little bit like, well, I mean, we talked about this in Marx, we talked about this in Foucault. So efficiency for the sake of efficiency for the sake of efficiency. Well, you look at the world and everything you see is a resource to be used efficiently. And humans dominate nature, but most importantly, humans dominate other humans, but also humans dominate themselves. We become dehumanized. Again, Marcuse, a student of Heidegger, says that, and also a Freudo-Marxist, says that the fundamental imperative of our psyche, of our superego, if you understand this phrase, is performance principle. The drive to be more and more and more efficient. This is the basic disposition of our modern Western European superego. This is the way Marcuse was a student of Heidegger, and Heidegger wants to say no. We need to. I mean, can he like? Why does he say no? Why does he say no? I don't think there's any simple, straightforward answer. Heidegger proposes this as some kind of a solution. So he thinks, for whichever reason, that a better approach is a poetic approach where you understand that treating the world and yourself as a resource to be used in an efficient fashion will not make you happy. But what you need to do is you have to look groundlessness in the eye. You have to look your death in the eye and become, as what Heidegger calls, authentic, sort of take responsibility for your own existence. But because still you cannot like Münchhausen, pull yourself from the swamp by tugging on your hair. That's impossible. You have to stand on the shoulders of beliefs, values, and desires that you get from your culture. Nevertheless, necessarily, you can never escape from this. So you will not do something radically different. It's not like, I don't know, dyeing your hair color pink, or I don't know, selling everything you have and going to live some remote island. Heidegger says if you do this, well, actually not Heidegger, but one of Heidegger's interpreters has this phrase, yeah, you sell your possessions, you go to live on a remote island, but then in a couple of days, your old self takes over. Your old habits, your old dispositions, beliefs, values, and desires, they take over. Or even if they don't, even if you change something, you can change your beliefs, values, and desires on the basis of the beliefs, values, and desires that you have right now. So there's kind of no escape. So in some sense, Heidegger's, and this was obviously point number 3. This is extremely conservative. This is maybe, to some extent, exactly what Arendt was opposed to. Like, if you're in Nazi Germany, it's not the question of going out into the streets and fighting against the Gestapo and getting killed. No, you just have to assume a different, like, poetic, contemplative disposition towards the world. Like it's exactly like Nietzsche in The Birth of Tragedy, or let's say, I don't want to say exactly, that's a strong claim. This reminds me very much of Nietzsche in The Birth of Tragedy, right? This idea that, yeah, life is meaningless and it's best for the human beings to not be born or to die as soon as possible. Yeah, but you can imagine that all this is just a theatrical spectacle and just derive aesthetic pleasure from looking at it, from contemplating it, what goes on. So in some sense, yeah, this is what Heidegger talks about. Hölderlin, German poet, is like a very important guiding rod. Guiding light of Heidegger's later philosophy.